July 21st, 6 p.m. at Clearlake City Hall, 14050 Olympic Drive to order. First half, the salute of the flag. Oh, whoop. Okay, David, you want to start this?
Of course.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll take a moment of silence. We lost over the last couple of weeks some significant people that made great contributions to the county and the city. So it's a moment of silence. All right. Madam Clerk, could you roll call, please?
Councilmember Overton?
Here.
Councilmember Kramer?
Here.
Councilmember Claffey?
Here.
Vice Mayor Purdock?
Here.
Mayor Slutin?
Present. All right, we'll go to adoption of the agenda. Are any changes to the agenda, Mr.?
No modifications, Mr. Mayor.
All right, can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Mr. Mayor, I'd move that we approve the agenda as presented.
We have a motion by Councilman Kramer and a second by Councilman Claffey. We'll go to our voting. Refresh. Are we missing one, Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Claffey?
Apologize.
Thought it was me.
This is killing my stats.
Motion passes with unanimous vote of the council.
All right, we'll go to presentations. Presentation of July Adoptable Dog, Charmaine.
Good evening, members of the council. All right, this dog comes with a little story. When it came to the shelter, it came with the name of Couch.
Couch.
The girls and staff didn't like the name Couch, so they named him Grouch or Groucho. He's a 1.5-year-old male Dachshund mix. He's scheduled to be neutered this week. He's currently vaccinated and he has a microchip. The shelter learned quickly that his favorite hobbies are that he likes eating treats, he likes playing in the yard, and then he likes running in the house and sleeping on the couch. Okay, so that's where they believe the name came from. If anybody's interested in adopting Groucho, they can contact the Clearlake Animal Shelter staff at 707-273-9440 or see Groucho in person. They can visit the Cleric Animal Shelter at 6820 Old Highway 53 in Clearlake, Monday through Friday, 12 to 4 p.m. by appointment. All right, thank you. All right, and year-to-date stats for the Animal Control Shelter. Year-to-date, 213 dogs have come into the shelter. Currently, 174 of those dogs have left the shelter. 94 have went to rescue, 58 were returned to their owners, 22 were adopted, and 1 was euthanized. We currently have a live release rate of 99%.
Awesome.
Great job, Lieutenant. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll go to public comment. This is the time for any member of the public to address the City Council on any matter not on the agenda that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the city. The Brown Act, with limited exceptions, does not allow the council or staff to discuss issues brought forth under public comment. The council cannot take action on non-agenda items. Concerns may be referred to staff or placed on the next available agenda. Please note that comments from the public will also be taken on each agenda item, and comments will be limited to 3 minutes. Do we have any comment here in the room here? If not, go ahead, come forward, ma'am.
Hi, good afternoon. Good evening, guys. Thank you for hearing me.
Please state your name, ma'am.
Margaret Garcia.
Thank you.
I'm a Clearlake resident. Two things, and they just happened. Well, first off, actually, I wanted to thank you guys for a really beautiful parade for the 4th of July. Really enjoyable. The horses were great. Everything really was nice, enjoyable. So I appreciate that. I live a couple blocks away from the lake, and I'm sure as anyone who's driven down Lake Shore in the last week has noticed the horrible smell, which is nothing new, but I'm just curious. You know, I was down by Redbud, Austin Park, and there's so much muck that collects. Has anyone ever looked into any kind of cleanup service that, you know, would do some kind of a shoreline cleanup that would at least alleviate part of the problem? Question. And then secondly, I was down at Redbud and I happened to notice a water truck backed into the lake, into the, where boats come in. And he started sucking water out of the lake. So I was curious. I thought, well, this is really kind of strange. We've got a low lake. And so I went over and asked him. He said that his permit, their water permit, allowed them to fill their water trucks up at the lake. So I thought, well, I don't know, but maybe you might know, city manager, about, does that happen? Can you get a permit that allows you to suck water out of the lake? So is there any kind of limit to that, or they just can?
I don't know if you would like me to try to
Yeah,
quickly
please,
address that
Mr.
question.
Flora.
We also have to be, because it's a non-agendized item, it's okay for the city manager to briefly respond, but we really can't get
I
into a
understand.
back and forth.
Yeah.
Yeah, so on that, it's a permit actually with Yolo County, who controls the water in the lake. It's not something that's through the
So YOLO.
through the city, and I don't know if there's limits on how much they can draw.
So the permits are given out by Yolo County, who owns the rights to the lake, right? And so these guys are coming from Yolo County, do you know?
No.
Or they're here, but they get permits from Yolo for the,
Yolo County
yeah, I know.
Flood Protection District is the.
Yeah. From them, it'd be nice if we owned our own lake, but, all right, so
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any on Zoom, Madam Clerk?
There are no hands raised on the Zoom, Mr. Mayor.
All right, we'll go to the consent agenda. Any change? Flora? Anybody from the council here that wants to pull an item? If not, we open it to the public. Any from the public wants to pull an item? If not, we'll bring it back for,
Make a motion to accept the consent agenda as submitted.
And I'll second.
we have a motion by Vice Mayor Purdock and a second by Councilman Kramer. We'll go to our lovely voting.
Aye.
Motion passes with the unanimous vote of the council.
Very good. We'll go to item number 6. Public hearing to consider adoption of Resolution 2022-48, approving the fiscal year 22-23 fee schedule. I assume this, our finance director will address this item. Go ahead, Mrs. Young.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. I am just about to share my screen in just a second. So this is just to be going over a little bit of the fee schedule. You all have a copy of the fee schedule in your staff report, and I'll just go over it very briefly, and then hopefully, you can ask any questions that you want, and we can go from there. Right, 1 second here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so thank you. Again, my name is Kelsey Young. I'm the Finance Director for the City of Clearlake, and we're going to be going over the 2022-2023 fee schedule. Traditionally, we do this as part of the budget, but this year we wanted to do a little bit more of an in-depth analysis of the fee schedule, so we're bringing it back now. If there are any additional questions, we can always come back and address them at a later date as well. So just a little bit of background. The fee schedule has been updated with some minor changes over the past few years, but due to sort of the substantial increase in inflation and other costs, we did a more in-depth review of the fees this time around, including analyzing the number of staff hours to complete tasks, consultant costs, the fees of surrounding area agencies, and also the cost of equipment and software. So our goals while looking at all of this was to make sure that we still kept it business friendly, still kept it developer friendly, had affordable fees, but that we tried to cover the majority of our costs, as well as making sure that we have the necessary software and equipment in order to move things efficiently and still be quick, have a quick turnaround time. So we did do a moderate increase to various fees. Do want to make sure everybody understands that the proposal will not achieve a 100% cost recovery. If I were to go based on the number of hours for most of our projects, things would have increased substantially. So we tried to find a balance in there of increasing our fees, but still not shocking and still covering the majority of our costs. We also broke out some additional fees such as plumbing, demolition, and solar, and we added a seasonal business permit for limited businesses such as short-term vendors such as fruit stands and things of that nature. Also, something I wanted to bring up is the council I know is well aware, we have a new contract in place for our animal control care services. And so we have updated all of the fees at the request of our contractor in order to meet their contractual requirements, and actually most of these fees have a small decrease. The animal care services provider will be retaining the revenue, so it really isn't going to be impacting the city. We also are adding some additional developer fees, plan check fees, and development inspections. We're getting some new developments, and they're very time consuming for staff to review. We're very excited to have these, but this type of fee is very consistent with most agencies, so we are trying to follow that. We also have added a 2% technology recovery fee in order to cover some of our software costs and make sure that we have equipment. We also have historically been covering credit card fees, which has been something that we have been supplementing out of general fund. So we are now putting that back out, so there'll just be an added credit card fee. As many of you all are aware, we're moving to more automated systems, so that'll just be part of that system moving forward. Then I added some fees for working with Director Swanson on the youth center, having some new rental fees for when we start renting out the facility of the youth center, should that move forward. Okay, so just to show you some of our methodology and the way that we went through determining that these fees needed to be increased. We looked at the number of average hours and average city costs. There are some that honestly were significantly higher than this too, but I tried to give you sort of more of an average example. So one of the ones that I wanted to bring up for example right now is our administrative use permit. And our conditional use permit tends to take about 40 hours. So that's an average city cost of about $2,400 to $3,200. So we have increased those significantly from $750 and $900 respectively to $2,000 and $2,200. And that still, as you can see, doesn't necessarily cover our entire cost. But since it is a larger fee, we wanted to still take it incrementally. So we have some of the other fees that offset a little bit of it, and we still, as I mentioned, are going to be supplementing this by general fund and other city costs. So we also took a look at other comparable fees by Lakeport and Lake County. So for example, use permit. And I used our higher use permit of the conditional use permit here. Lakeport has a fee of $725, which is more similar to what we had before. However, they also have an environmental review that's added on top of that, so it's a similar cost. But as you can see, Lake County is at $4,500, so we are less than half of that cost. So we still, this is why I'm saying we're still being developer friendly and business friendly, because we still have substantially lower costs. Some of these numbers are a little misleading in that Lakeport, for example, has a very different approach than what we do, where they have some base fees, but then they tend to take a look at the various building permits and processes and determine what the fee is going to be. We could also take that approach if that was requested. What we have tried to do is have a more upfront cost, just so that the community can have an idea moving forward and have the security of knowing what this is going to cost them. Again, as you can see, just going through some of the various fees, like for example, initial study is a really good example. We are proposing $1,500, which is an increase from $1,210. And Lakeport has an evaluation process, so dependent on this size of the project. And Lake County has an initial study fee of $3,050. So again, a little less than half. So I'll keep going. But again, I just wanted to go over that this increase is going to mostly cover staff time. And we also, because we're having so much great new development, there are times that we do need to reach out to consultants to supplement staff capacity or to provide additional expertise. So that also is something that can get a little expensive, so we're trying to have that covered as well. And then I mentioned the credit card charges and our software and equipment. Like I mentioned, the proposed fee schedule will still require some supplementation from general funds as it is proposed, but it will bring us significantly closer. Okay, so any questions or comments? I know lots of numbers.
Anybody from the council have?
No, I think that was well, from my well done.
Councilman Claffey, you have a question?
I have a few questions.
Okay.
So just so I understand, and I don't know if anyone here can help answer this, but from a historical standpoint, how did we get into a position where we were subsidizing a significant portion of fees? Was that a strategy by the city council or was that just a lack of updating?
I don't know if I can really speak to the full history of that. I mean, I think since I've been here, we've just made marginal increases, and they haven't really kept up even with salary adjustments and so forth. And, you know, we have a little bit different structure now with, you know, different staff and all that. And so, you know, you're supposed to, you know, you're not supposed to essentially make a profit on fees like this. You're required to just recover your costs. And so there's quite a bit of analysis that went into it, and we just haven't, with other priorities, we haven't really done a full review until this year. And so that's the nature of things. You kind of fall behind when that's the case. But we do want to make sure that you're clear that the general fund is subsidizing most of these with even what's proposed. But, you know, our feeling, I mean, we're happy to increase some of them if the council wants. Our feeling was just with the economic situation and whatnot, maybe now isn't the time to increase them to the full amount, but we certainly could do that.
Excellent. Director Young, you said that we're going to add credit card transactions to all credit card payments. How much do you expect to recoup through that additional?
We expect to recoup around $3,000 to $4,000.
Looking at the building permit breakout, and this might just be me misinterpreting it, but it looks like there's several new classifications added. So something like residential plumbing, was that not accounted for in the past? Was that rolled into a different permit?
I'm so glad somebody noticed that. Thank you. So that was included in the past, but we used a valuation process. And what we're trying to do now is just have an upfront fee that everybody's aware of as they're moving forward, coming into this. This is how much it's going to be. It also is something that takes a couple hours, so it's a little bit higher than some of the valuation. So we sort of took the average to try to make sure that we were recouping about 80% of our staff time.
So this isn't a net new, it's just a hard number that you're applying to this? particular-
Exactly.
Excellent. And then my other question was around development fees. This also looks like a net new, but is that, am I misinterpreting that as well?
No, that is correct. It is a new fee, but we had some other fees. We've done a few things in the past with developments fees, and City Manager Flora can always speak to this a little bit more too, speaking to the history. This was something that, in working with our city engineer and looking at some other agencies, we have had deposits and other processes like that in the past. And so this is a way of going away from that and just having a more structured fee moving forward.
Okay, so as I percent of engineer estimate, so say for a single family home of that would be valued at 300K, are we asking for basically $10,000 as part of that fee, or is that a different equation?
That is what we're currently proposing, yes.
Okay. And then on top of that, it'd be another $5,000 for a similar valued home for the development inspection?
Yes, but that would cover all of the various reviews and plan checks and things along those lines.
And then, so prior to this, how would that be accounted for in fees? Just so I have an understanding.
No, that's a great question. And I might turn it over to the city manager, Flora, just because he has a little bit better understanding. I worked with the planning committee, but I am not, with our planning department, but I am not somebody who typically works specifically on charging all of these fees, so I just want to make sure I'm not misspeaking. But my understanding is it was a compilation of other various fees, also using the valuation process. So depending on the size, in order to come up with the cost analysis or cost estimate.
So it's another situation where, as I understand what you just said, we're not now charging an extra $15,000 to build a single family home. It's just a replacement of other fees in a different format.
It's a replacement of other fees. However, I do believe it is a bit of an increase as well.
By a bit, are we talking hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars?
Can I get back to you on that
Absolutely,
specifically?
absolutely. I just raised that because I want to make sure that we're not, there are certain things in this community that there are certain actions that we want to see happen, right? We want to see single-family home development. We want to see lot mergers. We want to see events. And I just want to make sure that we're not pricing it to the point where it becomes unattractive given our current, the economic situation in this community. And the event thing were two things I pulled up, but then this, the way it looked on paper, it was a $15,000 increase just to build a single family home. If that's not the case, I'm relieved. I would like to know basically what that increase.
Okay, absolutely. I can get back to you on that one.
Thank you.
All right. Councilman Kramer.
Follow-up question to that. Have you done a comparison with other cities? I know he's concerned about the $15,000 increase, which sounds like a lot of money. But have you compared to other comparable cities to see what their total fees are for building a single-family dwelling, for instance?
So I have looked at overall, and like I mentioned, I looked at Lakeport, I looked at Lake County. I also looked at a few other smaller communities, such as Dunsmuir and Winters and a few other areas, and we have been consistently lower than almost everybody I've looked at.
I was an appraiser in a former life, and the city of Winters, since you brought it up, about 20 years ago, their average fees were $40,000 for a single-family house, for all inclusive of all of those things. So just to
I mean, my counterpoint would be, is that good?
pardon
Is that good to make
I'm
it?
just telling you what.
Oh, no, I get that, I get that. It's kind of the nature of California regulations, I understand that. But
No,
sometimes,
those were good questions, but that's a perspective that I thought might be helpful.
well, I think that's something us as a council has to determine, similar to like the lot merger fee, is do we want to use these fees to inspire action, or is our focus to cover cost? If it's the latter, then all on board, but do we want to use this to incentivize certain things, especially when we have programs like the homestead program, which is essentially offering money to incentivize people to build the type of houses or do actions that we'd like to see.
Which of course would offset some of those fees.
It would, but at the same time, we're kind of doing it to ourselves, right? Like, we're offsetting the fees that we're putting in place. So I just wanted to get a feel from the council, is our goal to cover costs, or is it to do a mix of both, or is it to inspire action?
I don't think we can do anything but cover costs. Isn't that what I just heard you say?
Well, I mean, you can subsidize them, you can't, more than recover your costs, but yeah.
We aren't going to try to make money on them.
Yeah, I mean, I think, from a sort of development perspective, if you're looking at, commercial development or larger scale stuff, our fees are 10 to 15% of what a developer would pay in Sonoma County. And no one really balks at the fees that we have. Now, I mean, I think the single-family dwelling thing is a little bit of a different issue on whether that's going to deter development. I mean, I think at this point, we don't feel like we're anywhere near where our fees are holding that type of thing back. But we don't really want to be, or at least from a staff perspective, be in that situation either, because we're hungry for investment.
Councilman, Vice Mayor Purdock, he was first.
Well, I just wanted to give a little background. When we updated our general plan, then that allowed us to look at fee schedules, and that was back, I think, before Greg Folsom was our city manager when we did that. Councilmember Overton can correct me if I'm wrong, but that was the idea, and one of the reasons what was really pushing and driving that update of general plan. And there were small incremental updates since then, but this is a very broad and sweeping, and I thank you very much for your report. Glad to see this finally happening. It's been a long time coming.
Councilwoman Overton.
Well, basically, I was going to kind of say what our vice mayor just said, is that we've always just updated just little things and stuff, and it's never been, I don't think we've ever covered the cost ever. Most cities do try to recover the cost totally, so I understand we're still far from doing that. So we can't get so far behind that we're taking so much of the public funds to pay for private entities, things that they want to do, because that's misuse of public funds. So to me, is if we're not even covering the cost of what somebody's privately doing, I kind of have a problem with that, because now we're taking other public funds and benefiting still. So for me, you're saying you think it's too much. Me, I'm saying if we're not covering the cost, I have a problem with it. So that's my problem, is that I feel like we cannot, I don't feel like we should be using general fund to cover the cost of a private entity's doings of what they want to do with their property. I think this should be covered at full by the person who's doing it. Isn't that kind of the law?
Okay. I have just two questions. We talked a long time back of traffic impact fees and some park mitigation fees. These are not included in this, correct?
That is correct.
And at some point in time, we were going to do that.
Well, so we have traffic impact fees that was approved. Those type of fees require a completely separate process. They're referred to as AB 1600, so there's a state law that, you have to do all this additional stuff. And you may recall, it's been a little while, the council did give us direction to work on recreation-related fees as well, and we just recently started putting that program together, and so that will be coming back to the council at some point. So, but it's not part of this because there's a whole separate process that's required to develop those type of impact fees.
Okay. All right. From that, we're open to the public. Anybody from the public wants to comment on this item? Mr. Sem. Chair.
Good evening, Bruno Sabatier, resident of City of Clearlake. I just was wondering, is there a hourly rate if it goes above and beyond the cost that were just provided to us? Because some projects are much more difficult than other projects, especially if there's amendments or changes, or you hit some kind of issue that you did not anticipate, and so you start changing the plans. Is there any kind of potential for ensuring that the public taxes don't fund projects as Councilmember Overton has been stating? Thank you.
Thank you. So there are some various fees that we do have some additional costs per linear foot, or we're actually having actual costs, particularly some of those, like our environmental, and I'm just blanking, the EIN?
EIR.
EIR, I keep doing that, so you have to forgive me. That particular one, we are billing at actual cost, and there's a couple like that too, to ensure that exact thing that you're discussing. So thank you.
All right.
I mean, you know, I would like to just share with the council, at least, there is a shift here a little bit from some of that, where we had currently like use permits and things like that. There's like a $2,000 deposit and it's billed to actual costs. Personally, I don't believe that that's really the way that we should do it, because I think there should be some predictability on behalf of the public, and I've seen too many times where we may into stuff a whole lot over here that maybe they should or shouldn't, and I don't know, we could do that. It would be a way to make sure you cover all your costs, but I also think that as a public agency, sometimes we can take that in a direction that really isn't fair either. And so, but like an environmental impact report, the level of complication for certain projects, it's impossible to predict what the cost of that type of report is going to be. So in that case, we propose a $5,000 deposit, and then it would be billed on actual costs. So.
All right. Any more from the public?
Mr. Mayor, City Council, Dave Hughes. I wouldn't feel right if I didn't come here and say something. And it's interesting that I picked out use permits to focus on, and it seemed to be the focus of some of the presentation, at least when I got here. I think what the council needs to do is weigh the income versus making something too expensive that doesn't encourage people to come into town. And I don't want to use the word abuse, but I think right now, under the zoning ordinance anyway, at least the way the staff's interpreting it, I think we're overdoing the use permit process. Example, some friends of mine bought they didn't change anything. It's been an antique store for 25, 30 years. Before that, it was a Sears catalog store on Lakeshore Drive. They're not changing anything. They bought the inventory. They opened up briefly on occasion, then they had to go out of state for a few months. And anyway, they applied for their business license, and I think they got it, but then it was noted that the prior owner of the store didn't get a business license for a few years. So all of a sudden they have to get a use permit. And my question is, why? Why do we put staff through the rigors of the time when they're doing nothing more than taking over an existing business? Not even changing it. They're not painting, they're not adding on, they're not reducing the size. They had a use permit hearing, and I think the bottom line was the city wanted some money for curb, gutter, and sidewalk, which isn't there. And I think it is all worked out now, and they're opening up, but I didn't see the need for the city to have a use permit in that instance. There's also a Center for Life Choices that wants to open up on Olympic Drive, and I represent the property owner. And they started remodeling, we executed a lease. The lease would start payments when they open their doors, and they come to the city, and all of a sudden, because the word clinic's in there, they have to get a use permit. And it's in an existing building that has been, it was built by an optometrist, and it was used for that medical purpose since it was built. And now we're changing the use, using the word clinic, and all of a sudden they have to get a use permit. And if they had to pay $2,200 for it, they'd probably still do. I don't know what would wind up being in there, maybe something different. They'd shut it down and it'd be another empty store on Lakeshore. So I think we need to watch what we're increasing and make sure we're not overdoing it. While I appreciate Councilperson Overton's comments, I believe, and I don't know all the ins and outs of the negotiations, but the city just put a nice street in from Olympic back to where the youth center will be and the corporate yard. And to the left of that is a nice driveway with parking stalls and a building pad for a coffee shop. And the lease with the city is $500 a month for that coffee shop for 10 years. And I don't remember seeing any increases in that rent over that 10-year period. I think the city probably has a pretty good investment in that parking lot and in that building pad. And if we're going to talk subsidizing and offsetting expenses, to me, that wasn't a fair market rent. So I'm just pointing that out as an example of things we need to pay more attention to. And we don't want to get carried away with fees, especially when it involves bringing maybe a new business into town and all of a sudden they're faced with, well, I'm not going to go pay $2,200 for a use permit. I should be able to just open up. So forget it. You got to weigh that all when you're increasing the fees. And again, I mainly focused on use permit. I have no idea if it takes 40 hours for the average use permit or not. But I realize you also have power and water and electricity and air conditioning, and although that's going to be on anyway, I think all those need to be factored in, as well as the payroll and the benefits that you're paying someone to do the work. So it just seemed like more than doubling that fee seemed excessive to me, and that was just the one example that I picked up on. So that's the one I focused on. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. If no more public comment here, does anybody on Zoom wants to chime in on this item, Madam Clerk?
There are no hands raised on the Zoom, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, we'll bring it back to the council. Any additional question? Madam Overton, please.
So I have a couple. When do we have we been looking at the estimated time for each one of these categories to make sure that we're falling into, okay, all right. So, and are we going to kind of watch this for this next year, maybe bring this back at budget time so that we can see where we fare? I don't want it to go as long as what it has been over the years, and I understand that it's you know, that we're looking at this and this is, you know, it costs, but the reality is the public shouldn't be paying for somebody else's benefit, and that's just how it is. And you know, permits are, you know, there's laws on those permits. If they haven't been open for a year and it's not in the right zoning, then it's a use permit. It's just the way it goes, and I'm sorry that that happens to people because they're not, you know, they don't come in and ask the questions. But yes, if we go through with this, I really want to kind of have it brought back on a regular yearly basis instead of us waiting periods of time, because then they jump and then we have these things. Instead of jumping a small amount every year if we need to cover costs, it would, to me, that would just be better.
Well, I mean, that's fine. We bring it back every year. I mean, if the council wants to additionally give us direction to, you know, phase in 100% cost recovery or however you want to do it, that would be very helpful information to.
We have no more questions from staff over here from the council.
I have one more comment. I think part of this, because of the big jump, has to do with you guys being really good at your jobs as well. So it is a little bit, it is eye-catching for sure to see this type of jump, but I do appreciate the work that went into this. And it sounds like, at least from my perspective, the consensus seems to be that trying to cover costs as much as possible is the direction that we'd want to give. Looking to other council, I know Councilmember Overton feels that way, but just want to get that from both of you.
Eventually, we need to, I don't want to do a big, huge jump next year or something like that. I just think we need to start looking at some increments every year so that people. Sorry. I'd like to look at increments every year so that, we don't have these bigger jumps, that they're more on a basis of people expect smaller jumps as wages go up and economics and stuff like that. Because it's just not the public's job to pay for private entities' benefit. It's not. And so we need to get to the point where the public isn't paying for that. I don't expect it to happen now, but I do hope that over time that we can correct this mistake that should have been done most likely a long time ago.
All right, thank you. I'm looking for a motion.
All right, Mr. Mayor, I'll like to make a motion, we approve resolution number 2022-48 and read by title only, adoption of the fiscal year 2022-2023 fee schedule.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilman Kramer and a second by Vice Mayor Purdock. We'll go to our voting.
Aye.
Madam, what's the result of the vote?
Motion.
All right, we go to item number 7, section. An annexation process for approximately 300 acres at 2050 and 2122 Ogland Canyon Road. Mr. Flora.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Introduction here, and then we'll take from there. So, proposed cannabis operation on Ogland Canyon Road, just outside the city boundary. The city council issued a letter of support for that project as required by county ordinance for their use permit to go forward, and that project did not move forward through the county permitting process. And the property owners of that property also have some projects in the city. They approached us discussing about kind of what direction to move next, and eventually they sent a letter requesting that the city of Clearlake consider annexing those two parcels totaling approximately 300 acres into the city for them to move forward with some type of development proposal. And so really tonight, what we're asking is just whether the council would like to give us direction to move forward with that process through Lake Lafco. And the property owners are here and their representatives, so I'm sure you'd want to hear a little bit from them on what they're thinking about the project, and we'll take it from there.
I have anybody questions right now? I have one. What is the adjacent zoning of that? The zoning of the.
You mean within the city boundary?
Yes.
It's all, well, it's used to be referred to as C4. With the new zoning ordinance, it's industrial zoning, yeah.
Whatever.
All right. Maybe the property owner wants to make his case and see what they want to tell us.
Evening, council members, staff, members of the audience. My name is Richard Knoll. I'm a planning consultant in Lakeport, and I've been working with the property owners of the former Hops Field or the Hops Farm project at 2050 and as was stated, the council and by the city manager, there was an application submitted to Lake County for a cannabis project that was approved by the Planning Commission but denied by the Board of Supervisors on an appeal. And subsequent to that action, we of Clearlake initially was some discussions about water supply and availability of water, and it progressed to a discussion about annexation. And so for your support, and actually we would like the city council to be the applicant for LAFCO's annexation process. We've had some discussions with John Benoit at Lake LAFCO. He actually prefers that the city be projects. It's actually been that way for a number of years. There are really two ways to do an annexation. One is through what's called the resolution of application, which is where the city would apply, but there's also a process where the property owner can apply as well. In this case, there are some aspects to the project that require some initial actions on the part of the city, including amending the sphere of influence, designating your general plan, and also pre-zoning the property. Those are all prerequisites to being able to have LAFCO actually make a decision on the annexation. And those are actions that really only the city can engage in. It's your sphere of influence, it's your general plan, and it's your pre-zoning. You know, we actually do request that the city consider being the applicant, and if that is not something that is supported, we would certainly request a strongly worded letter of support for consideration by LAFCO. You may have some questions about, you know, what is the land like? What are the advantages of, you know, bringing this property into the city? What are the appropriate general plan and zoning categories? And all of that, I think, would need to be determined. But we have actually initiated a very early planning process, and I have a handout that is kind of interesting. What we are looking at least initially, is an industrial mixed-use concept. And that's all it is at this point. You know, the idea of an industrial mixed-use concept on this property is interesting. What we are looking at are some initial nodes of development that are identified on that map at the bottom of the page. And again, this is all very, very early in the process. As you know, as time goes on and as projects are considered and analyzed, things can change. But we wanted to kind of give you a snapshot look at what might make sense on this piece of property. What's interesting about the city zoning is that you actually have a mixed-use zoning district that might be appropriate for this site. And I've also included some discussion about mixed-use projects from a developer's perspective in terms of what the benefits of a mixed-use project might look like. So with that, I would like to invite Brian Pensack up to have him talk a little bit about the urgency involved in this process. We were over 3 years into the use permit process at the county. It's a very expensive process. That did not pan out, and this opportunity has presented itself. Obviously, it's your decision as to what you want to do, but we respectfully ask that you take a serious look at this. We think it has merit, and we thank you for your consideration.
Okay, any questions from, okay, go ahead, Mr.
Yeah,
Property owner, please.
Okay, thanks. Hi, my name is Brian Pensack. Thank you for hearing our idea tonight. Mayor, Alan, it's been a pleasure. So you probably know a little bit of the history. There's no point in getting into it. Didn't turn out as we had hoped, but sometimes turning lemons into lemonades works out. We've met a few times with the mayor and with Alan to discuss some options, what the city wants, what might work for that land. It's beautiful land. There's lots of stuff we can do with it. And from what we understand, the city has a desire for a kind of a light industrial presence in the Aguilan Canyon area. And we thought that might be a great option for the land. Throughout our history, even working with the county, Alan has really been our biggest advocate for just the project in general, the former project. And once we kind of got the idea of maybe working together with the city, we were excited, not necessarily this exact project, but just working with an entity who actually wants you and will benefit from you. Obviously, if we're able to create something, it'll bring a lot of tax revenue and other benefits to the city. So our ideas, as Richard said, are not etched in stone. But we were at the property a few weeks ago, and I asked the mayor. We were at the base level. There's a house there. There's a bunch of wells, and I said, "Turn around. What do you envision here, in your best case scenario?" And he said, "Well, maybe like 100,000 square foot building for cold wine storage, because we know that the wine industry needs that, and everyone drives up to American Canyon to do that." And we thought that was an interesting idea. But just to build on something like that, or housing, I know that the city doesn't necessarily need more housing per se, but if we're going to have workers in an industrial area, there may be a need for some sort of housing there as well. So I think the options of things that we could do there, pending approval from all of you and things that make sense, are good for not just us, but mostly for the city. And I think that working with an entity that there's a mutual benefit is something that we're really excited about. So happy to answer any questions, if there are any.
Questions?
I have one initial question. This map has got, I think, 6 designated areas on them. Is there any meaning to the numbers, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of each of those?
Well, they were I would refer to them as nodes. Those are areas of the property that could easily accommodate development of some sorts. Because, out of 303 or 305 acres, there's a lot of trees and other things that wouldn't really be beneficial to develop on. But those areas I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. Well, number one corresponds to,
Well, are they in context of what you're thinking about now? Do those numbers, is it number one going to be residential or commercial, or what, is there any?
I think, and Richard, I'm not sure how you numbered them, but the field near the house, that's probably where we'd want to start, because it's perfectly flat. It has the water, it has electricity, it has everything.
That would be
Yeah,
number one.
Brian actually described it pretty well. Those 6 nodes are areas of the site that have a more gentle topography. They, for the most part, are cleared already of vegetation and major tree stands. They're easily accessible. There actually is a pretty good roadway network existing on the property. Each one of those nodes is tied together by an existing roadway. As indicated in the little description sheet there, would be opportunities for providing utility corridors serving those areas. And I've had a discussion with an engineering firm about the idea of developing individual nodes, and we looked together at the site, and some of the thoughts that came out of that discussion, the paper that you've got, but there was also some discussion about more residentially oriented development as opposed to a conventional mixed-use concept. And, you know, we haven't done much in the way of in-depth planning or design work. So a lot of that remains to be seen as to whether or not it's viable or feasible from a, you know, a typical land development perspective.
Of course, you're aware of the city's oak tree ordinance. If you start removing a lot of oak trees, that's going to be a pretty big expense to you for whatever use that you consider.
Right.
And I would agree with you in that there are some sites up here that would be beautiful home sites. I actually used to cultivate the property for the hops owners at one point in time, so I'm somewhat familiar with lower part. Excuse me. I have that problem. I lean back. I'm familiar with the site. There are some beautiful sites on top of the ridges that I think would fit homes very well.
Right.
And there's some areas down below that would support industrial use. I would agree with that. I'd like to know a little bit more about your specific, if you have specific problems. You're throwing out general ideas here, but does that mean cannabis is out of the picture?
We have no current plans to do cannabis, so I would say yes.
Do you have any future plans to do cannabis?
I don't.
Yeah. Obviously, if we actually went through the process of annex, started it in our name, are you going to come back to us later and say, oh, well, or are you going to come back and say, gee, we still like these ideas
To
of
be
the,
perfectly honest with you, I'm done with cannabis. It's really not an area that we want to continue. You know, we've been beaten up. You don't need to hear all the stories, but no. So
well, you did part of that to yourself, if we go back to 2020. So,
you know, that's
but at any rate,
it is what it is.
yeah. So going forward, your idea is probably not going to be. You don't think that's what you're telling me. Okay.
You know, I think a caveat, you know, properties do sell, new owners come into the picture. If industrial zoning is, you know, given to the property by the city, that zoning district does permit cannabis operations.
It
as
may
you
or
know.
may not permit cannabis operations.
Subject
Not
to
all
use.
of our industrial is particularly as cannabis brewed.
Well, okay, good point, yeah.
Okay, Councilwoman Overton.
Okay, So I have kind of a question, probably for our city manager in a way. If, let's say cannabis is out of it, has this been taken to the county? I mean, there are certain regulations for us to take away from the county as the county can't take away from us. So where does this fall into that category? Because I know I went through this and I fought that because tax money is going from us to the county and it's too close, so many miles, et cetera. Where does this fall into that type of category? So,
Yeah, well, I mean, we haven't initiated any of that. You know, we need first to know whether the council's interested in moving forward, but that would be one of the initial steps would be to, you know, you're required to try and negotiate a property tax sharing agreement with the county. I did talk to the county administrator and let her know that this request had came forward and that if the council was interested in proceeding, that, you know, we would need to get together and begin those discussions.
if we did proceed, how much of this is, do you have an estimate of cost of what this is going to cost us to do an annexation? Because that takes some time to do.
Yeah, I mean,
so.
it's, you know, it's not something that's super easy. I haven't, you know, been through this specific process before. I mean, there's, Mr. Knoll mentioned it a little bit. I mean, you know, there's some additional steps that aren't always the case, and it can kind of be done at the same time, but, you know, currently the city of Cleric doesn't have a sphere of influence, and you can't annex a property unless it's in your sphere of influence. So that would have to be kind of part of that initial process. We have to do the pre-zoning and all that type of stuff, staff time that it would take to do that. But, you know, if the council's interested in moving forward and is interested in moving forward with negotiate, you know, some partnership to have the applicants help.
To you guys is if your idea has changed, have you went to the county to talk to them about doing something different on that property?
I can say that we have not. The county hasn't been real receptive to, it's hard to know who to talk to. Everybody's left. So there's really no options at the county for us. We're hops or something like that doesn't necessarily fit the bill, I guess, for that. So there.
All right, thank you.
Councilman Claffey.
Cost is a question of mine as well, so if we do move forward, I think that has to be investigated. The other thing is urgency. So you mentioned you have a pretty accelerated timeline. Do we feel like that's a timeline that we could match with all the unknowns?
Well, I mean, you know, they've said in their letter that, you know, they would like to have it as soon as, you know, fast as possible. You know, I don't know. We don't have a guarantee on when we could provide. I mean, there's a lot of possible unknowns, but, you know, with any projects, we try to move them forward as fast as we can. And if this is the direction of the council, we would certainly do the same on this one. I don't know if Mr. Penzak or his partners have any specific timeline. I think because of as I understand, because of the history and the 3-year permitting process and so forth, you know, they're just, investors are anxious to see something proceeding there. So as far as I understand, that's really the urgency in moving this forward.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Prudo.
Thank you for coming forward. I appreciate this. My only question is, I've been looking at annexation in the eastern edge of the city limits as well as the western edge of the city limits. I think the city can provide additional law enforcement and other support to those residents, and we need additional commercial and industrial zoning for growth. So I'm not just looking at this particular property, but other properties within that same sphere. So thank you for bringing this forward. It's something I would like to see go to LAFCO.
Okay.
So just so I understand, you're thinking about lumping in multiple annexation projects into one?
That is a possibility, and that could be the way the LAFCO would I think it would be better to receive it. And there's other properties in that same area of the Ogden Canyon project. They're currently within the county. And the property owners there have expressed interest in coming into the city.
Yeah, if I can make a recommendation on that, I mean, there has been some discussions about that with the council before, about looking at other areas. I think, since we don't have anything in the sphere of influence, if there's other areas of the council ahead and moving forward with adding those in the sphere of influence. But I think with kind of these potentially disseparate areas with annexation, it could get a little complicated, and issues over in this region may bleed into this and, you know, cause the whole thing to blow up. And so I think it would make sense to, if you want to look at other areas, include them in the sphere of influence, but keep the annexation themselves separate.
Okay, thank you. Good.
I have one more.
Councilwoman Overton.
Okay, so first thing we have to do is the sphere of influence. So, and that really should be done anyway. I'm looking at that, that's probably is something that we should do. I'm kind of not quite sure about the annexation right now, because I'm not looking at, I mean, the cost, how long it's gonna take. And I'm not against doing the sphere of influence either way, because I think it should be done in case on it, we do wanna go through with this. So how long do you think it takes to do the sphere of influence?
I don't know. I mean, we've estimated this probably going to take, you know, 6 months or so to do this. I mean, I don't know if Richard has any input on that. I mean, I think if you did it all as one, essentially as one package, it shouldn't have to take much longer, I don't think, to do the actual annexation part, unless you get into protests and all that stuff. But because you have a property owner that's coming forward asking for it, that's should be out of the picture. I know Richard's been through this. I mean, he's been involved in the Lakeport annexation, which is kind of a little bit different beast.
Well, and that's kind of what I'm looking at, is like, that took quite a while, and there was a protest against it, so then it was longer, and
That's
so
a whole
that was
different
one of
animal,
the
though.
things that, you know, that's a concern. You're sitting there wanting it really fast. I'm sitting there saying we need to kind of maybe take our time. So give me your thoughts on that.
Well, first of all, sphere of influence, general plan amendment process, pre-zoning, all of that has time associated with it.
Right,
And
right.
it really depends upon how the city wants to structure that, whether you go out and hire somebody to put all that together, have the developer pay for it, maybe even the developer, different ways that can proceed. One of the important aspects of this is that it's subject to CEQA. So it is a project, there is an environmental review. LAFCO actually uses that CEQA initial, their consideration of the annexation. As you get into this, it
Right. And time consuming is what? We're
and-
saying
and
6 months. I'm not seeing
time-consuming.
6 months here is what I'm not seeing at all.
Yeah,
So
well,
I think it's gonna be
the-
way
the-
longer than that.
representing the property owner here, and given the history of, you know, I'll just say it, they're in a hurry.
Well,
They're-
and I understand that,
They want to be able to move. And so we'll just hopefully keep that on the table, whatever direction we go here.
Yeah, and I
there's
understand
an
that they're in a
urgency.
hurry, but I'm saying that these things do all of the stuff. So I just, in my mind, but I'm just not seeing 6 months. I'm seeing long.
Are we interested
Yeah.
in seeing that?
Well, and I just want them to know that it's gonna, I just don't see 6 months, so even if we went through it, I'm all for
I
the
mean,
sphere of influence. That to me is anywhere else, because sooner or later, the city is gonna grow, and I think that should have.
We're not giving them a guarantee that it's going to take 6. Good. In most cases of expediting use permits and things like that. I mean, it doesn't, unless there's some crazy thing that happens and the project gets changed a lot, it doesn't take us 2 years to process a use permit like some other jurisdictions. I mean, we've done them as fast as 3 months. So I think, if you look at it strategically and line things up, I mean, there's a lot of things we could do to economize on time if that's the direction of the council, but.
So let me get this. We have to change the zoning?
Well, you have to do it's called.
Oh, okay, so we have to zone it because
We
it's
have to
not
make a
ours.
designation.
Right,
yeah.
because it's not ours, so we would have to make a designation. And that needs to go to the planning commission, correct? And then from there, you do the spheres of influence after that has been approved and
No,
changed, or
I
before?
think the sphere goes first. Sphere of influence goes first.
Okay, so either way.
You can't annex something that's not within
Well,
your
no,
sphere
I'm
of
not
influence.
talking about the annexing, I'm talking about our process. Ideas, or is that all included in this?
I don't, I haven't mapped out the whole process for you. I mean, I think really what we're looking for, is this something you're interested in or not? If you are, then, we're willing to do what we can to move.
I have a couple of comments. I like to see, I think, just like Vice Mayor Purdock, industrial zoning create jobs. Just if it's 100 facility or something else. And I think the applicants here are the people who know that you're not going to be able to do what you try to do at the county. We're pretty clear on that, right? So any kind of development, industrial development, I'm all for it. It's a big process. I'm the council, so it will be mapped out. But that's my 2 cents. We open it up to the public. Anybody from the public has something to say about this?
Dave Hughes. And can I, Vicky,
When we get to the other comments.
what I was
we'll
hoping
vote
was
it.
that we could read Vicky Crystal's comments.
Her comments will be read.
I was hoping we could do it before I give my presentation from Vicky.
Okay.
Is that-
Madam Clerk, could you read her comments?
I appreciate it, thank you. And I don't know
Miss-
what it says, I just,
Ms. Crystal's on the Zoom.
Oh, she's on Zoom?
So-
Okay, she can,
Okay, my
so
understanding was-
typical procedure, Mr. Hughes, is in person, then we'll go to Zoom, and then we'll come back.
I'm not typical.
We know that.
Now, Vicky mentioned that she had sent you an email and
Correct.
Was
I
gonna-
do have it. I just wanted to make it clear that Ms. Crystal is on the Zoom, but I can read her statement if that's the.
she indicated she
where
would
the-
probably be
Please
on
go
Zoom.
ahead, Madam Clerk,
Yeah.
read her statement.
Okay. Approximately 300 acres at 2050 and 2122 Augulin Canyon Road, Clearlake. I understand why, and the advantage in some cases to annex pieces of property on the city-county lines into the city. I am having a difficult time with appeal at the supervisors meeting for 2050 Augulin, not because of the concerns of the citizens for how it might but for the lack of integrity and business ethics of the applicant, Brian Pensack. You may also know that it did not stop there. An email was sent the very next day stating we should reconsider and negotiate, as he already had 2 vineyards wanting to purchase or lease the property and, quote, you know how much water the vineyards use, end quote. I take that as a threat Dave Hughes has that email and they may want to read it to remind everyone who we are dealing with. He was permitted to grow in the city at 2122 Augulin, only to turn around and put the property on the market. I would like to see this annexation put on hold until more information is shared with the public on the suggestions of what types of industrial projects, etc., that were discussed with the city are. They certainly should move city water onto that property and not use the well water. Because he was denied by the county, he is attempting to go through the back door to get his project approved, but to expedite the annexation rezoning process to help him is unacceptable. I think we need to take our time, and yes, I understand Pensac's concern for time, but let's face it, he created that issue for himself by allowing the cannabis grow to start before it was approved. No excuses for his lack of responsibility as the landowner. Are these really the type of people we want to do business within our community? And that ends her statement.
Mr. Hughes, you're up.
And I did not know what she was saying in her statement. A couple of things I wanted to mention. I know it was mentioned that we don't have enough industrial land. I did a little survey within the city limits, and right now there's approximately 135 vacant acres of industrial zone land in the city of Clearlake. And then if you went to Park Place, which is just down from the school bus yard, Park Place land is in the county. If we annex that, because it's right there, kind of surrounded by the city, that would be another 35 acres. Now, there is that big warehouse that's in existence, but I didn't include that in the 35 acres. So to say we don't have enough industrial land right now to develop, I don't think is necessarily true. And I remember when we were zoning the city back in the early 80s, one of my questions was, why do you have this big concern to have all this industrial land? And I still feel that way. I do agree that, it'd be nice to have that wine storage facility out there and people working there. But he can do that with the zoning in the county. I think a wine storage is a ag use. Vicky kind of reminded the city, this property has a history. Part of the history is violating the ordinance. Growing 40,000 plants, I think it was, illegally. Putting up hoop houses illegally. Mr. Pinsack wasn't directly involved in the growing, other than he's the property owner and he's ultimately responsible for what happens on his property. So their early grow permits revoked. They violated the ordinance. The city council approved the 2185 Augulin. Vicky had it wrong, to do a grow on the other side of the street, the city property we sold to Mr. Pinsack. Within a few days, he put it on the market for $2.5 million. It's now $1.5 million. 160 days later, he'll finance it with half down and no payments for a couple of years. I would love to see wine storage facility out there. I'd love to see the jobs that go with it. But we need to be careful what we're doing. This gentleman is coming to us. We're not going to him. And the history isn't all that great. As far, he mentions in here, time is of the utmost importance, as I'm sure all involved are aware, as we worked on the county project for over 3 years. Our neighborhood on Zoom, when it was approved for his, we weren't successful in our successful. Water is a big concern. Another big concern to me was growing within 1,000 feet of the city limits. And I'll never forget Mr. Pordock saying, Hughes, it doesn't matter whether it's 100 feet or 1,000 feet, you're going to smell it anyway. So what's the difference? I'll never forget that. And fortunately, if it comes in the city and he does grow, it'd have to be indoors. So that could eliminate the odor problem. Could, being how well someone develops the product. Risk to being in business. Just because he has upset investors doesn't mean we need to push this through quickly. I'm all for moving things forward as quickly as we can, but are there more important things we should be working on than annexation? 150 acres sitting around now waiting to be developed. Pardon me?
Are you done?
I was just looking to see if I am done.
Okay.
Maybe we need a planned development zone in the city, like the county has. You have a piece of property, you have to plan the whole parcel as part of the zoning process when you go to develop it. MUX certainly touches that, but a planned development has to be more specific. You know, saying that he has no options with the county is not true. He could still do his cannabis grow, but he'd have to go through the environmental impact report. More costly, yes. More time consuming, yes. But it's an option.
Okay.
I see no reason to expedite this project any more than any other. I don't think there's a dire need to bring 300 acres of industrial land into the city. To build, and I don't see that as happening.
Okay.
I have utmost respect for Mr. Flora, but when I hear the applicant say Alan's been an advocate all along for him, that bothers me, because I don't want city staff being an advocate for the developer. Certainly do your job, do your reports, do your studies, but it makes me nervous when someone's an advocate for a property owner.
All right, David, you're way past your 3 minutes. So.
Okay, I didn't hear the bell ring, but I'll...
I'll give you some leeway.
You can gavel me.
All right, thank you. Any other comments from the public? If not, I'm going to close the public hearing.
Mr. Mayor,
We got Zoom.
What? Hold on. We have Aaron McCarrick.
we also have a comment from Zoom.
Okay. I was going to ask that.
Aaron McCarrick. I don't necessarily have City of Clearlake. I don't necessarily have an opinion on the annexation of this property, but I will just talk about lump in the throat. I will just talk about cannabis conditions of approval in general. Something that I advocate for at the county level and at the city level is transparency. So I don't know if this applicant is going to do cannabis. I don't know if they're going to sell it, and that applicant's going to do cannabis. But I would urge the city to put conditions into any sort of application for cannabis that ensure that there's transparency with local and state licensing, and potentially with communication with investors and the public. Cannabis has silver linings. It's controversial, but it also has silver linings. If we look to our neighbors and we look to how we can interact with each other, it asks us to look at the environment and how we're impacting the environment. We're one county. It's just parcel and parcel next to each other. We should not be adversaries against each other. We should not be adversaries against... We just created an ad hoc committee. We didn't. I think it's great. It's bringing in environmentalists. It's bringing in ag. It's bringing in industry people. So if this passes, please look out for the safety of our citizens, and please look out for ways to be collaborative and productive.
Thank you. All right, the person on Zoom, Madam Clerk.
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Hi, this is Elizabeth with Lake County News. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. I just had a...
Is reconnecting?
Elizabeth?
Okay, we'll wait a minute for Anybody else on Zoom, Madam Clerk?
Their hands raised on Zoom. Oh,
Are you coming back on, Elizabeth? Just a minute, just a minute.
She's here now. Up, she was.
Well, I'll recognize you in a minute, Mr. Sabatier.
yeah, I'm not sure what the issue is, but she's showing up fine on our end.
Mr. Sabatier, please. Maybe in the meantime, Elizabeth Larson will get back on.
Good evening again. Thank you for discussing this topic. I won't say that you should or should not move forward. Just wanted to speak from the LAFCO perspective. As many of you know, I am the chair of LAFCO, working with Mayor Slutin as well as many others to discuss how we go through the annexation process. I have a feeling this will be a completely different process than the one we just went through with Lakeport. I think one piece of property with mainly property taxes that we're talking about, there's no other financial issues to talk about, that will simplify the process. My guess would be one meeting to figure out what the tax sharing agreement looks like. Should be fairly simple. And then there is the process. And so part of the LAFCO process is to ensure that the city is going to be able to provide the necessary services. At this moment, very small amount of services would be required. The city doesn't offer water. The city doesn't offer a fire district. It would mainly be police. And at that point, with the lack of residents out there or the minimal amount of residents, I doubt that that will be an issue. But I do want to provide a suggestion to the council from the perspective of LAFCO, where part of LAFCO is to protect open space and ag land, and the potential for that large change would definitely need to provide proof from the city that it's impossible to provide that same type of development within the city limits. And so I think that would make for the strongest argument from the perspective of the city, is to ensure that those arguments are made nice and tight. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, was Elizabeth able to get back on?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Great.
Okay, all right. I don't know what happened. Anyway, so I had two quick questions. One, in the 2040 general plan, it looks like the city's sphere of influence is now the same as the city's boundaries, and that where these two properties, or this 300 acres is in what's called the sphere of concern. Is that accurate?
I think so.
Yes, it is.
Okay. So my second question is, has the city had any other annexations since its original incorporation? And that's my last question. Thank you.
Not that I'm aware of.
No.
No, it has not, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, we'll bring it back to the council.
We have one more hand
One more hand
raised
up.
on Zoom.
Okay.
We have Ms. Gardner.
All right, Ms. Gardner, you're up.
Hi, yes, I'm sorry, I couldn't just sit here and hear Brian Pensack's and Garrett Burdick's character assassination like that without saying anything, because I'm involved in the property at 2185 Ogulin Canyon, and David Hughes was actually the realtor that sold that property as a cannabis property in his listing, and then went on to appeal the cannabis aspect. So that's all I really wanted to say. I just think that it needed to be checked, because defaming someone's character because somebody made it, his tenant made a mistake and did something they weren't supposed to. He accepted responsibility and has moved forward from that, and has come up with, through the creativity of the city and meetings, has come up with this other great idea. And I just had to say that. Thank you.
Thank you. And was that the last public comment? We'll close the public comment. Bring it back to the council. Mr. Kramer, Councilman Kramer.
To be fair to the last person that just made that statement, Mr. Hughes was representing the city selling their property. I don't think it reflects on his personal feelings before or after. So just wanted to make that comment.
All right, any other more discussion on this?
I wasn't quite done yet. I think that I would have been a proponent of going ahead with this, putting it in the sphere of influence, this property in the sphere of influence, and annexing it. But my reason for it is so that the city can have more control over what happens with it. What these gentlemen do in the future will be subject to the city's regulations and zoning, and rather than the county where we had no control, no local control. County, it was right on the, right on the edge of this. From that perspective, I am a proponent of going forward with the annexation. My concern, Mr. Pensack, is just what's been addressed by several others. Operations were running it at the time, at least 4 major things that you violated: that land, housing workers on in inadequate housing, and of course the little state problem in which you didn't have a permit to grow the cannabis to begin with. So I'm glad to hear that you want to be out of the cannabis business. I think that's great. I actually, in reading what little I've been able to read through of this, I kind of like the ideas. If we go through with this, it would be certainly my recommendation that we annex it with the idea of mixed use would be fine, or mixed use and industrial. I don't think cannabis should be on the table for this. For this annexation as far as allowed uses, and you wouldn't have that one to think of, and let you focus on something that I think would be a positive for the city, rather than that. So my recommendation would be to proceed with exploring the annexation, and but under the circumstances that we do it. Your letter is asking us to concurrently, let me read this to make sure I get the right letter. Well, basically you're saying you would like for us to work with you to concurrently go through. I think that we have to do is the same process that any other developer would go through. Hopefully it won't take more than 6 months or a year, but that's how I would looking at annexing it. That's
thank you. Councilwoman Overton.
Okay, so I'm okay with going through with annexing it, but it includes the sphere of influence, which I think we needed to do anyway. I do hope, I love the idea of industrial, and it's very profitable and a lot less headaches for the landowners. Rent is really nice when you don't have to do a lot of the other work that goes along with it. So I do hope that you stick to this plan. I agree with Councilmember Kramer on some maybe there, and hopefully we can work with the landowner on maybe discussing some of that stuff. So I think right now I'm for, that's all going to come back to us anyway, so I think that I'm for going through it and getting it started.
Great. Councilman Claffey, any additional comments?
No, I would be for proceeding. I don't actually think this is the hard conversation. I think once we get to cost and timeline, that's where it's going to be more of a focus. So I would say move forward with investigating this and sphere of influence as well. I'd be for that.
Vice Mayor.
I already spoke.
Okay. The only comment I have, I like to see if we can more strategically look at our sphere of influence. I've been a proponent of spreading the city out a little bit more. So I would see what other parcels we might think that might be a good idea to add to the sphere of influence part. And I'm for the annexation.
Well, we can certainly, as we move forward on this, maybe do some type of little workshop before one of the council meetings or something. I mean, I've said it before, I'll say it at the workshop, but, you know, we have a lot to get our arms around right now, so expanding too much of our boundary, I think, is something we should be careful about, but I think we have a very odd city boundary is the way it is, and so there are some areas that might make sense. So if that's your direction, we can certainly put some little workshop together and try to focus on some details on what else you would like to consider adding to the sphere.
Great. So you're looking for guidance at this point?
I think we have.
I think you have it.
yeah.
Okay, very good. We'll go to item number 8. Mr. Flora. Thank you, gentlemen.
Let me find it here. Okay, so so this is consideration of amendment to recovery MHP or multifamily housing funds. So you may recall that as a result over 1.15 million of these funds, and then as a result disaster countywide, the structure was a little bit different, and we didn't receive a direct allocation. The city of Lakeport did, and then the county received an allocation. The county didn't have any projects at the time, so they relinquished their funds to both cities, and we went through a joint process with the city of Lakeport to distribute those funds. So we had 2 applicants that applied for those funds. One was the Oak Valley Villas project by Danco that's under construction now near the community center. Because they were further along, we decided to go and allocate all of the funds they requested. The other applicant was the project by Chelsea Investments on 18th Avenue near the hospital, and this was part of the county-state land swap deal. And so they had requested $3.5 million of funds, and the remainder of these funds wasn't enough to fully fund their application. So we went back to the state and we said, is there anything you can do? I mean, this is literally HCD-owned land at this point. You probably should see if you can come up with some additional funds to make this project move forward. So there were some other funds in this program that were unspent by other jurisdictions. Just within the last couple of weeks, they notified us that they had been able to free up enough funds to fully fund the second application. They also allocated some additional funds to projects in the city of Lakeport to fully fund the projects that they requested. And so just want to give you a little background. This is just a procedural modification to our agreement with HCD to include the additional funds. And if the city council desires to approve this resolution, then we'll be able to continue forward in the process. Fortunately, they've been pretty good in this case and not requiring a bunch of different applications, and they merged it all together to keep it as simple as possible. And hopefully this will get that project moving forward. Just to back up slightly, the bulk of the funds with all these projects is through tax credit financing, and they have some of the smaller pieces put together, and then they're planning on applying for those tax credits in the March round of funding coming up. But they are very far along in their planning, and they would be expecting to break ground sometime next summer, assuming they get that award.
Great. Any questions? I have just one quick comment. It probably was a good idea to give Danco the first round as much as possible, because I'm sure that McGuire was able to kind of rile up the troops there and get.
We did let him know that
Chelsea project
the project needed a little more fun.
Not open to the public. Any comments from the public on this item? Anybody on Zoom, Madam Clerk?
There are no hands raised on the Zoom, Mr. Mayor.
All right, we'll bring it back to the council for consideration.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to approve resolution number 2022-47 and read by title only. A resolution approving an allocation any amendments thereto from the CDBG-DR program, replacing resolution numbers 2020-36 and 2022-04.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilman Kramer, a second by
of the council.
Very good. We go to item number, section I, item number 9. Chief White, you want to, that's your item?
Thank you. Good evening, members of the council, mayor, and members of the public. The item before you tonight is to authorize us to enter into an agreement with the city of Lakeport for supplemental law enforcement services. The Lakeport Police Department has requested our assistance with providing some extra coverage. While we provide mutual aid on a day-to-day basis, otherwise known as neighbors helping neighbor without compensation. In this case, it would be appropriate for the receiving. In this case, Chief Rasmussen, who's here today, contacted me with this need, and as we started discussing it, I quickly brought up and we agreed on that, tomorrow it could be our agency asking for help in the same situation. So what we thought was most appropriate is if we came up with an agreement we needed this service in the future, that we could contact them, and we'd have a framework to do it, and in a rapid amount of time. So at this, the agreement provides sort of the outline of how it would work. Essentially, Lakeport would is how it would be covered. So some of the base costs like health insurance, those sorts of things, those are paid for on the base wages. But the agreement does provide flexibility so that if we, but again, in this case, we're talking about overtime. We did have our Intergovernmental Risk Authority, CIRA, review the agreement because they cover both cities and provide our insurance coverages. So they've reviewed it and they've okayed the agreement. Contract. There's one more change that came in today, and essentially it's just adding language in attachment A defining that the work agency. We don't see a problem with that modification. And then there's mention in there about retirement contributions. Again, under overtime, there is no retirement contribution for that. But if we did have somebody on regular time, they asked to add the modifier CalPERS normal cost, which makes sense because the other cost could be unfunded liability, and that's accrued well. With that, I'd like to ask Chief Rasmussen to just briefly, what the situation is in the background. And then I've also asked our POA president to be here just so you can get the perspective from the officers who would be providing said service. So with that, Chief Rasmussen.
Good evening, council members and city. The current background on it is, as you probably heard, for the last several years, is very difficult. There is a drastic decrease in the number of people throughout our state and country. We're down numerous positions. We have been working hard to try to hire those positions. We did in fact hire 3 people this week, but the problem is they've got to go through either recertification courses or police academies, and that takes a number of months. We also have a solo beat officer at this point, so I'm in a situation where I have some vacancies. We have Lakeport police officers. They might be working alone or have limited staff, and so that's why I reached out to Chief White. Police officers in Clearlake on days off act as a secondary cover officer, so we would have some more backup for those staff. We don't intend to have Clear Lake officers be the primary on investigations, certainly major ones, because we want to limit any court time or things like that that would interfere with other things. So, and where I'm going to be facing, the next few months, starting in August, is where we need some assistance. So that's why it's here. We've had a long-term relationship with Clear Lake going back, 30 years or more. We're always, having officers over here, or they come over there for special events, or we've been here for numerous fires as they have over there. So we're comfortable working with Clear Lake. We have a good relationship with the city and the police department. We've done joint training together. We've worked together. We're now under the same risk authority since CIRA was created a year ago. So it makes it very easier to do something like this rather than another jurisdiction that's got all different risk authorities and things like that. So I appreciate your consideration in looking at this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Rasmussen. Detective Franklin.
Council members, I'm Detective Franklin. I am the president of the Clearlake Police Officers Association. I'd just like to address a few things. So, some concerns that have been brought to my attention recently about the assistance with the Lakeport Police Department. When the idea of our officers assisting Lakeport PD was brought to the department, Chief White approached me and asked for my input and the thoughts of the officers of the association. I've contacted most of the officers in our department and received an overwhelming response. I have personally been with the department for 9 years, and speaking from experience, I'm aware of the difficulties and dangers faced by officers due to being understaffed. The members and I want to help the fellow law enforcement officers in the community of Lakeport. I understand the fear of burnout and overworking our officers. This is a voluntary basis. If our officers are not able to work a shift or feel overworked, they will not be compelled to go to Lakeport and work. The mental and physical safety of our officers is important to me and Chief White. If they were not able to, we would not have agreed to the additional workload. If something were to change in the future, we would be sure.
Thank you. Any questions?
I'd just like to ask, the last part was, I asked the city attorney to just briefly speak on the liability component. We live in a litigious time, particularly in law enforcement. So if you could just briefly explain the coverages that are provided in the agreement.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So in particular, looked at sections 4, 5, and 6. Those are the ones related to workers' compensation, insurance, and liability. And fundamentally what it is it's a reciprocal agreement. So there's not, either side doesn't get a benefit of the other. I think they're very fair terms. I think the key points that you'd want to know is when it comes to injuries or workers' compensation, the lending agency would take care of their own employee. So if our officer's injured over there, we'd still be responsible for them, and vice versa. However, when it comes to indemnification and defense for a claim related to their law enforcement services, the receiving agency would indemnify the lending agency. So again, it goes both ways. It's reciprocal, but I thought those are terms that you should be aware of. And in my review of it, I think this is the most fair way to do it for both sides. And as the respective chiefs mentioned, the fact that we have the same risk pool with CIRA, I do think makes it a less complicated situation.
All right, Vice Mayor Purdock.
I like the innovation. Chiefs, good job. I didn't think about the POA aspect. I was just going to ask that question, Chief, so I'm glad that Detective Franklin was here to share that this is a good way to keep our community safe. And well done.
Councilman Claffey.
Just some clarification. So is this voluntary duty or would this be assigned?
It would be a strictly voluntary duty.
Okay, great. officers be using our equipment, so Clearlake patrol cars in Lakeport?
So they've offered either way, and there's pros and cons to it. So we haven't worked out. It offers either way. So if we do use our cars, there is a reimbursement on a mileage basis for usage of the car. The sort of conundrum there is that the officer's car is sort of like their office. So if I change your office every day, it'd be a little challenging. But that said, they have different cars there, and so some of the officers are interested in driving their cars.
I noticed a car that.
You guys have a Dodge Charger, is that? Velcro on the side of the doors and just switch off the emblems. Let's see, and that was my question around mileage reimbursement, because these are leased cars. Any concerns there?
No, I think that the mileage reimbursement would cover it, and it's a smaller geographic area and a lot less hard on the cars, so I think, you know, we'd work through it. If we saw that it was a significant usage that became a problem, we would obviously work with Lakeport, and that's why we wanted to include both options in there. If we see that we need to use a car, for example, if one of our cars goes down, now all of a sudden we don't have spares right now. We have we have some spare vehicles, so we're doing okay.
Excellent. And Detective Franklin, thank you for offering the perspective of your folks. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
For answering those questions, because those are the ones I had, and the risk management was also. If they were to use computer systems, or they're just out the computer system?
So they don't have computers in the cars. We can share data back and forth, so they can query their database from our cars. So that part wouldn't connect directly to, because they're dispatched by the county. It doesn't connect directly, but they can access information from there.
Okay, all right, that's kind of was just curious. Thank you. And I think
All right.
no police officer should ever be by themselves.
Okay, we open it to the public. Any public comments, Madam Clerk, on Zoom, or anybody here in the room?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Councilman Kramer, please.
I like everything I heard. I like your presentation. Thank you all for speaking up and give us a great report. And with that, I would like to make a motion to authorize Chief White to enter into a law enforcement services memorandum in the City of Lakeport.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilman Kramer and a second by Vice. All right.
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes with the unanimous vote of the council.
All right, we go to item number I-10.
Mr. Mayor, can I just ask one final question? So from a logistical standpoint, you know, our officers will be getting overtime in service of Lakeport. They'll be getting potentially some overtime in service of Clearlake. We'll be able to break that out so we know the distribution.
Yes. Accessible. So if you ever wanted a report or a constituent that they'll be able to see, I believe the term provides monthly invoice, sort of the outflow of resources and the compensation back.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
First reading, ordinance number 265-2022, amending Chapter 10, Section 10-3.5 of the Clearlake Municipal Code relating to appealing abatement orders to the City Council. Mr. Jones.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. So in an effort to always improve our practices and look at the municipal code and see where we can modify and make amendments, that's what this is about. So over the past really couple years, the council's probably only had a handful of these appeal hearings that has come to it. And in our firm, in doing them, we've done these for other jurisdictions. We've noticed that in the code, there's a couple areas that could be simplified, modified. That's what we're bringing forth to you, is really just trying to get rid of some of the extra language that sometimes can create confusion. So you'll now see it. I'd say it's a more streamlined version. It applicant, or for an appellant, I should say. And so with that being said, I think this is a good amendment going forward to help streamline with that, I'd recommend that you do the first reading today, and we'll bring it back for a second reading at the next council meeting.
Makes sense.
Okay, do we have any questions? Staff? Comment?
Public.
You heard public and you woke up.
Good evening again. So actually, I'm about to bring a potential amendment to our appeal process. 11th hour, and there's no rules and regulations that says that you can't. Just something to think about for the future, that maybe you want to set a deadline so that it gets printed with the agenda within the 72 hours, so that the public has a chance to go through the material, as well as the council members, or for the sake of the Board of Supervisors, the Board of Supervisors themselves. It gets annoying when we've had this happen at least 5 times that I've experienced. I know that probably hasn't happened for you guys, but the fact is it could. And so something to think about that could be added in there. I know that I would love to see that in there for me, because seeing 100 pages when you don't have it until 8:30 in the morning is just not fun. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments on Zoom, Madam Clerk?
There are no hands raised on the Zoom, Mr. Mayor.
Somebody wants to take this? Oh, go ahead, madam.
Since Bruno brought that up, is there something, looks to me like we do have something here, which,
No, I don't think we do in terms of deadlines for that.
or the paper, yeah.
They have certain deadlines to be noticed and to give us
Right.
notice that they want to do it. What I would say, I think that's a good protocol, and we could tell applicants, please provide as early as possible. But if somebody does, at the day of the hearing, bring in a record, I would advise you do consider it, whether you need time to maybe do a continuance or make time to read it. I don't think you could put in something that says, we must get it 7 days in advance, and if not, we won't consider it.
Because they're filing on a time frame also, so sometimes they don't have that paperwork until, okay, that's kind of just what was my question. Okay, thank you.
All right, I'm still entertaining a motion.
All right. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion for the introduction and first reading of ordinance number 265-2022, an ordinance amending Chapter 10, Section 10-3-5 of the Clearlake Municipal Code related to appealing abatement orders to the City Council. Read by title only and set second reading and adoption for August 4th, 2022 meeting.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Councilman Kramer and a second by Councilman Claffey. We'll go to our vote.
Aye.
Okay.
Motion passes with unanimous vote of the council.
All right, city manager's report.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, just a few things. We received our sales tax update this week, and things are looking okay. We are seeing some slight declines from a year ago. We have a little bit of an unusual situation because we didn't see declines during COVID. We saw very significant increases. And that curve has stopped, and we're still above where we were like pre-COVID. That growth looks good, but we're definitely in a bit of a correction phase. And some of that's certainly happening statewide, although some other areas who did see a lot of declines during COVID are still seeing some moderate increases. There's a lot of factors related to that. Certainly, the Federal Reserve policy is starting to cool spending. Retail type stuff is pretty stagnant at this point. We are seeing additional increases in receipts from fuel sales, as you might imagine, and used auto sales, which were really high over the last couple of years, are starting to slow, and that doesn't impact our general fund Bradley Burns amount, but it does impact Measure P and Measure V revenues. So then just one other little thing related to that I thought was interesting in the report. They have an analysis from Beacon Economics, which is a consulting firm that does a lot of economic analysis and kind of related to the situation with inflation. And this is a statistic that I hadn't seen anyone else provide before, but they estimate that as a result of COVID, there was 1.6 billion, 1.6 trillion in income loss, essentially, as a result of COVID. And with the Federal Reserve quantitative easing and then just spending bills from Congress have resulted in 11 trillion to offset that only 1.6 trillion. And so that's why we're seeing the inflation. One other bit of received today, CalPERS released their preliminary estimates on their funds for the last fiscal year. You may recall that last year the fund received a 21.3% gain, which unfortunately resulted in an automatic lowering of the discount rate, which pushed our costs up. This year they're expecting the fund to have lost $29 billion for the year, which is a negative 6.1% loss. And so all of our cost assumptions are based on their fund receiving 6.8%. We lost 6.1%, so that just means it's going to push our costs up in future years. Now, I forget, in the last 5-6 years, they smooth both the gains and the losses. So it used to be that we would have a big spike because that loss or gain was just realized in the next year. Now they smooth it over 5 years, and so we got a little bit of benefit from that, and then the next 4 years there'll be benefit. So it kind of averages a little bit, but and not unexpected, but not. Pedestrian on Highway 53. I just bring it up in the sense that, there's, this is state property and state infrastructure, but kind of largely as a result of the Highway 53 corridor study that we recently did, there's a number of improvements, pedestrian related, to those intersections, as well as a pedestrian bicycle overcrossing that was proposed from the airport property over to kind of connect into the future bus station. We just found out about a funding source that we believe these projects would be a perfect use of federal highway funds, and so Ms. Young and her team were working on a plan to go after those funds. So hopefully some pedestrian improvements at the intersections, as well as possibly funding that overcrossing. So figured the council would be interested in that. The Sulphur Fire Project and the Burns Valley Project are both complete. Second MODOC project has started. That'll be a good one. And then believe we're on a path for the. That's my report.
All right. Councilman Kramer, you got anything exciting?
We didn't give too much away on that splash pad. Yeah, a couple things only. Lake Links, we did hire a new program this past Tuesday. Our Board of Supervisors approved not only the $50,000 that was recommended by the committee to them, but the full $100,000 that Lake Links had requested to enable and get our volunteer driver program off and running. We're very grateful to the Board of Supervisors. You can pass that on, Supervisor Sabatier. I also thanked Supervisor Simon personally for his contribution to that effort. I went to yesterday, day before, I attended a Fire Safe Council workshop. I would like to, and again, Supervisor Spaccia and I are working on this together, enacting a Fire Safe Council for our area, roughly the Lake County Fire Protection District boundary area, which I think will give us a lot of options and open up grant funding for us for fuel reduction projects and home hardening projects and educating our community to wildfire protection methods. That's all I have.
Councilwoman Overton.
I do not have anything to report except for I will be gone for 1 month. I will not be back until the 21st of August, so I will miss the next 2 meetings. So.
Okay, we can decide all
You'll be
kinds.
back August 21st?
August 21st at 10
And
o'clock.
you're leaving again in September?
No, I'm not leaving again in September.
So you're going to be here.
That's why I said I wasn't
September.
going to the
You're
thing.
going to be the representative. I just want to get this cleared up.
I'm going to be the representative of.
Good.
I'll be here all by myself.
Councilman Claffey.
Nothing to report, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Purdo.
Ended the AVA meeting yesterday. I just want to thank city staffs, PD and Code Enforcement Officer Lambert for their reporting. Nothing else to report.
I attended LAFCO meeting yesterday, and we discussed the South Lakeport last item that LAFCO was supposed to do, and that was up in a vote, right, Bruno? And we talked a lot about bylaws, very exciting. And got an update on some of the smaller MSRs that are currently underway. We're still looking at an Upper Lake Water District that had contamination issues, although we didn't really talk about water district in the city of Clearlake. There's no new news on that.
When you finish.
I'm trying to remember if there was anything else. For the rest, nothing exciting. Okay.
We did also have a Lake Transit Authority meeting, a very short one, just to clean up some very short issues, but that was it. Nothing really exciting other than some housekeeping.
Okay.
That was it.
Always keeping us in the loop when things are happening, and much appreciated. I think sometime back I asked for how many fatalities we've had on 53. There's just another one, I guess. It's the highway or the freeway is being used as a pedestrian corridor, so that's the big problem. So, and I think I've brought it up at APC a couple of times, and finally, maybe they're thinking about solving this with an overpass, but.
Well,
you
your
still
city
have-
staff is at least, so I can't speak for them, but we're figuring it out.
You know,
It's still-
walking across the bridge over Cache Creek, because they have to go to social services. That's because these people that need that service don't have transportation, so they walk, which is dangerous. So, anyway, thanks for keeping us up to date. I don't know any future agenda items anybody has? No. Not?
You need to think about any items you want to bring forward when Councilmember Overton's gone the next couple of meetings.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about that already.
5 minutes, Dirk.
5 minutes break. Thank you. 5-minute break.
But you're not going to the league, right? Okay. Okay, I thought so. I just wanted to make sure, because.
That's why when he said that, I was like, no, I'm going to be representing the city.
I could watch the video. Yeah, I'll just come by when you guys get done.